Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. On Fridays, we talk about the product owner role in Scrum. We talk about patterns and antipatterns that relate to ours and the team's collaboration with the product owner. And we've also put together a course to help you navigate that relationship. There's 18 modules, nearly 8 hours of tools, techniques, videos, handouts, presentations you can use to help you and your team work better with your product owner. The course is available at bit.ly/coachyourPO. All lowercase, all one word. That's bit.ly/coachyourPO. And now, on to the show, the Product Owner Show. Hello everybody, welcome to our TGIF and Product Owner episode this week with Chris Foley. Hi Chris, welcome back.
Hi Vasco, thank you.
So Chris, Friday is all about Product Owner because of course Product Owner is one of our most important stakeholders when we work as Scrum Masters. Our relationship with the Product Owner is one of the critical enablers or impediments to helping the team. So let's start with what might have been potentially the worst product owner anti-pattern you've witnessed in your career.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you this from a slightly different perspective because I filled the product owner role myself, right? And I might come from the side of what didn't work for me and then maybe what did work for me. So I think on the anti-pattern side, or what the product owner really needs to avoid is there's a scale here that, there's kind of ambiguous requirements dropping into a team, right? That's one end of the scale. And the other end is a kind of a dictatorship approach, telling them explicitly what to do. So if you fall on either end there, you won't have a good outcome, right? So the product owner that is ambiguous, like if they're given the kind of the one-liner thing, as a requirement, if there's no clarity, what happens is it leads to frustration. The Scrum Master is frustrated because they know the team are struggling to consume. The stakeholders probably because they're not getting the output at the end of the sprint or things. So if the product owner falls into that too ambiguous side of things, the whole thing will struggle, right? If they go to the other end of the spectrum and come in from dictatorship approach, again, it's going to be not optimal or not efficient. If they're coming in telling the engineers how the design should be, if they're involved too deeply in technical decisions, if they're down at the API level questioning things, the product owner that drifts into either end of each spectrum there is going to really struggle. The goal here is to get to the middle ground and provide enough clarity, but allow the team design, trust the team and allow them design. The other anti-pattern I'd like to call out on...
Before we go there, Chris, don't forget where you're going. Before we dive into the other anti-pattern, I think there's an interesting perspective. In your own experience, having been a product owner, how can the Scrum Master help the PO navigate when they are giving too much detail or too little detail?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's a key role for the Scrum Master. Like the Scrum Master, for me, really needs to build up a good rapport with the product owner. The Scrum Master needs to be able to give that feedback, and I would say the Scrum Master needs to say to the product owner, look, you need to allow the team design, right? Allow them develop. You need to have trust in them. Now, at the end of the sprint, you can say, look, maybe this wasn't appropriate. I didn't want this. But you need to give them, you need to trust them. And I think it's like, I don't think there's any silver bullet here. I think it's engagement. The Scrum Master engage with the product owner and make them aware that, the team are skilled in this software design space. Allow them execute on their skills. You feed them the necessary information, they will execute from there. So I don't think there's anything special here, but the Scrum Master really needs to engage and communicate clearly to the product owner if they're starting to drift into either too ambiguous requirements or too detailed and trying to get involved in technical discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. And the delivery of that feedback is very important because, as you said there, it's important for Scrum Masters to understand that they need to become a partner. They need to help the product owner navigate the different extremes that you mentioned. All right. And the second anti-pattern you had in mind, I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. I think here, the product owner that, again, and I've mentioned this before, doesn't get, the MVP mindset. Deliver MVP and iterate from there. So the product owner that comes in looking for all the bells and whistles, it must have X, Y, Z, everything, because, the whole methodology is to, deliver kind of often. And so small iterations. So the product owner really needs to get that. And again, trust the team to, it might not be perfect at the end of sprint 1 or sprint 3, but we can take it, tweak it, add another piece, maybe add another bell, in sprint 4. So product owner that doesn't get the MVP kind of approach and the iteration on that, that's a difficult place as well. And again, this is where the Scrum Master can really be influential here, that to say to the product owner, let's get this piece out and you can have a look at it. Then we'll add after that. And getting the product owner to think about their user stories in that structure, that MVP and add from there. So that's something, again, the Scrum Master can be very influential there, and it benefits everybody at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one aspect of the MVP that maybe it's good to highlight, and I don't know if you think the same way, so Chris, this is just my opinion, feel free to disagree, is that unfortunately the MVP is, in my opinion, a wrong name to what that is, right? Because MVP is about getting started in growing a product, but because it's named product, people will immediately understand that, whatever comes out of the MVP is already a final product. And for me, that is a kind of a mental blocker for many people. So I tend to call them minimum viable experiment or minimum viable business deliverable or something like that. Because when we use the word product, at least I get the impression that people get stuck on the word product and forget that it is about learning. It is not about finishing a delivery. What do you think about that, Chris?
I fully agree, Vasco. And I think, I've used the term MVP there, but my implementation of that is as you described, right? It's not a kind of an absolute finished product. It could be one small function that we have that we get it in place as part of the delivery, and then we iterate and build on that. So I think that's a very good observation, that the terminology there doesn't really, represent the philosophy behind that, right?
Absolutely. And now we turn our attention to the opposite, the mirror image, which is, of course, potentially the best product owner you've ever worked with, Chris.
Yeah, again, as I said, I'll give you what worked well for me here. So sometimes when you look at the documentation and all that about, the project owner and their roles and the sprint review, and, accepting the work or non-accepting the work, I think it's a little bit formal. And what I've tried to do, and which has worked fairly well for me, is I have worked with the team before we come to the sprint review. And there's a certain amount of tickets that they would hope to deliver, that they would have selected in sprint planning. But I would sit down with them, with the lead, some of the engineers, and saying, look, you're going to deliver this piece here. How are you going to present it in the sprint review? What's your idea? So we would sit at a whiteboard, the Scrum Master, myself, and one or two of the engineers. And we would go through even, what their demo would look like at a high level. I would let them tell me, look, this is what I plan to show here. For me as a product owner, like I would see myself being kind of the conduit between the team and the stakeholder. So sometimes, the engineers would, obviously they're engineers at the end of the day, they will talk that technical language, right? So I would have worked with them to say, that's really good, but we need to bridge the gap up to the language of the stakeholder. So maybe they would even put in a small diagram before they'd even demo to explain the different components that they're going to show, how that interacts with, say, the UI or whatever. So the product owner playing the role of that nearly interpreter, translator between the two worlds, the very technical world in the team and say the business kind of language and domain, right? So I think that was one of the big things that I got great value out of. And I think, again, the stakeholder valued, and I built a very good working relationship with the Scrum Master and the team. So they would eventually come to me and say, look, I'm showing, we had there recently, one of the engineers was working on a fairly complex topic like conflict resolution, right? So there was conflict in the data, firstly detecting of it and resolving it. How would they show that off in the sprint review? So we worked on how we would articulate that such that the stakeholder would get the complexity and understand what was happening. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I have found value in, is that engagement with the team such that you can get that translation from technical to business and make that clear.
Absolutely. I really like the perspective of the translator because that also shows that you are working with the team not just as an external who's asking, but you're also working with the team to help the team succeed. Because at the end of the day, and this is one of the things I insist on working with the teams that I work with and of course with the clients that I work with, is that at the end of the day, if your business is to sell software or services based on the software you produce, then it is the team's success that is business success. Because if the team isn't shipping, the business isn't growing. Exactly. And, I think, as I said, the product owner that can do that translation, and I often see a good product owner is nearly an educator, right? They educate the team on the business need and what's behind the ask. Why is this ask coming in? And then they do the reverse. So they educate the business on maybe some of the complexities that the software is trying to achieve in order to fulfill the business goal. So in my head, a good product owner is that kind of conduit in the middle that translates and educates both sides, because I think we all know that you sit in a stand-up, the language used in there in your engineering team, where you sit in a roadmap discussion with the business stakeholders, they're two different languages. And the PO must fulfill that translation and education in the middle. Absolutely. A great reminder. Thank you for that, Chris. Unfortunately, we're getting close to the end. But before we do go, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing? Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Christopher Foley, Red Hat. I don't tweet an awful lot. I tweet about my sports background. So you'll find me there, but it's more sport related. And actually, I done another podcast with a colleague of mine, Alexis Monville. It's called Look Podcast, and we discussed, can software teams learn from sporting teams? So that's a whole different perspective and looking at the parallels between both, because I think there's a lot of commonality across both. So that's kind of some insight there, Vasco. Absolutely. And please do send me the link to that podcast, because I'm definitely one of the, let's say, the the people who think that we can learn a lot from sports teams in terms of, growing a successful Scrum team. So please do send the link. I'll put the link on the show notes, and also the link to Chris's LinkedIn page also on the show notes, so that people can easily contact Chris and also listen to that podcast. Thank you very much, Chris, for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thanks, Vasco. Really appreciate it and enjoyed our discussion.
One more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast is over, but there's a lot more we have to share. We have developed our own membership site where you find a community of active and engaged Scrum Masters. In this site, you get access to exclusive content and get to interact with us, your podcast hosts, as well as the best Scrum Masters in the world. Join us at scrummastertoolbox.com/podcast and keep this podcast free of advertising. See you next week for one more week full of Scrum Master tips and tricks. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.